I think we'll get started now. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Heather Palawada and I'm a Business Development Associate here. And this is Faith Bartlett, and she's the Operations Manager here at Ward Technology Talent. And we're an IT staffing firm with a mission to build communities that have a positive impact, which is how the Mobile Learning Lab came to be over 4 years ago. We host these events monthly, and we are always looking for feedback and suggestions. If you have certain topics you're interested in hearing about or know someone who could be a great speaker, please feel free to speak to one of us at the end of the event.
Likewise, if you're looking for a new role or simply just curious about what's going on in the market, you can speak to one of us in the Mobile Learning Lab series after the event. But now I would like to introduce our moderator, Kevin Kelly. No stranger to the tech scene, Kevin is currently on the Humber Institute of Technology's Multimedia Production Program Advisory Committee and is the co-founder of DevTO and MTech. He has over a decade of experience with web development, covering both back-end and front-end technologies. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin.
Thanks a lot. And of course, we've got pretty much our two, not teams, just you guys know that. But anyway, we pretty much have like four professionals in the development end that focus on both Angular and React. I guess we can start with this guy over here.
Sure. My name is Santiago Elusondo. I've been in the modern JavaScript world for about 4 years, and it has been a blast. If you're new to the landscape, I welcome you. It's really a lot of fun. It's a fast-moving train, so hold on to your hats. I worked on various startups in Toronto. I've used React, Node, Angular 1, Angular 2 during its inception and beta phases. I've had my code break on me due to breaking changes many a time. And I've worked for a consultancy here in Toronto called Wrangle.io, which works with many clients across North America to provide, just build products, user engagement tools and products, and has been at the forefront of the development of these great open source technologies. I'm currently the Director of Technology at Elephant Space, which is a non-for-profit group here in Toronto. Let me just start off by saying I'm supposed to be quote-unquote Team Angular, but I'll start off by saying that I love React. I think it's a very elegant solution to a very fundamental problem. However, there has been a lot of perceived conflict between the two technologies. It's something that could be perceived as almost a struggle for supremacy, which I think is completely wrong, and I completely disagree with it. I think they have very particular use cases where they both shine greatly. Yeah, exactly. See, this is wrong. This title is wrong.
It should be the ultimate talk-off.
Yeah,
the ultimate civil discussion.
The ultimate reconciliation. Angular 1 came out many years ago. Well, it feels like many years ago. And it just showed people kind of the potential of modern browsers can do and the potential of single-page applications. And it seemed it wanted to be the silver bullet for web development. Although it was the first attempt at something that first attempts are what they are, and they needed to be completely rewritten, it turns out. It wasn't the best solution to the problem and to all the problems that we're trying to solve.
Why don't we finish?
Yeah, actually, you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I'm Alex Wilmer. I'm a software developer at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. I've been in the JavaScript space for I think 5 years now, so I was really into jQuery. I think that a lot of us started that way. When Angular 1 came out, I loved it. It gave me JavaScript superpowers, so I was able to get through a lot of stuff really fast. And then React came out, and I ditched Angular 1 completely for React because it was much simpler and I had extra superpowers. And then working at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, had the opportunity to upgrade a fairly complex Angular 1 code base to React, and really all in on React these days, but I sort of sympathize with the point of view that it's really not an ultimate face-off. I think that there's not a useful discussion to have. And I think that over time things are becoming easier for everybody in all aspects of front-end development. So, you know, I'm curious to see where the technical difference is, where the common ground is.
I'm Jacob Bungray. I'm currently Director of Technology at Idea Rebel, which is a digital agency out of Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. I've been programming since I was 12, and I've been designing and doing photography since I was about 14. And I kind of fell into advertising when I was about 18, 19. And technology in the world of advertising is unstable at best. And so, I have a colleague here, he's trying not to laugh. So like in 1 year you'll do everything from like banners to like a major sophisticated, you know, qualification application that it takes into account the emotions of the user. And so to say you need to be versatile is an understatement. And so on that note, I hate JavaScript. I am not like thank you with a passion that you will hear throughout the night, because I didn't start with it, and it's a procedural like scripting language that over time has evolved into something more powerful. And again, from people that may have worked with me in the past, you have heard me say frustratingly in the years between Flash and JavaScript maturing, okay, well, like, how do you do that? And someone saying, well, you can't do that. And so now we're at a point of excitement where when I'm asking like my JavaScript specific, you know, geniuses that work for me, all right, like, you know, how do we do this programming concept? They go, oh yeah, no, we can do that. And that's exciting to me because it means that we're actually at the forefront where web application development is actually merging in complexity with traditional application development that you would do directly for, you know, a MacBook or something like that. And that's an incredibly exciting place to be in the world. And it is because of that deep hatred of JavaScript that Angular is my favorite, because it's TypeScript and it's not JavaScript.
Hi, I'm Sayyid Masafar. I started web programming when there was nothing besides vanilla JavaScript. So I used to work with it, and then eventually we got jQuery around 2009 or 10. I think somewhere around that time. I thought it was the best thing ever. You could do a lot of stuff with a lot less code. I learned that, made a few things in it, and then I stumbled upon Knockout.js, and then I thought that was amazing because you need even less code to achieve a lot of stuff. And I made a lot of stuff in Knockout.js. I thought this was you know, the most amazing thing. And then, you know, around that time, mean stack got pretty popular, so I bought a book on it. I learned MongoDB. It was okay, Express and Node, and the last chapter was Angular. I started reading it, and I thought that was the worst thing ever.
Angular.js.
Yes. So I just threw that book and like, you know, I'm never going to touch Angular, and I haven't till this day. So about almost 3 years ago, then I, you know, React. I came across React, and I thought that was the best thing ever, and I haven't looked back. I still think that this is the way to build apps on HTML. So that is my view on Angular versus React. Currently, I'm the team lead at Playground, which is a digital agency, and I'm leading a whole team of React developers and working on apps for our clients.
And just unless we're changing it, but we had a pre-debate over the phone days ago, and we agreed we weren't going to talk about Angular.js. So let's just quickly get it out of the way.
Yeah, may I get it out of the way?
Angular.js is an ugly stepchild of Angular.io, which is Angular 2 and up. call it Angular.io, don't attach a number to it because the number is changing rapidly, and Google has a very aggressive release schedule and has promised that they're not going to break previous versions, so you can just call it Angular.io. To my understanding, if the truth is to be believed, Angular was written by one dude in his spare time at Google, and then he went on and wrote Firebase, which is a much better tool, by the way. If you haven't used Firebase, it's fantastic. And he was still on the Angular 2 team, but he only did concepts at that point. He wasn't in charge of actually writing it. But Angular JS was like one dude as a hobby built it out to show the world how powerful JavaScript could be. But understanding that one dude made that, it's no wonder it was a nightmare.
SPAs weren't really a thing at that time, as I was saying. I mean, everybody was using jQuery before then, which is great to start out and see like how quickly you can get things to happen on screen, but try to build a whole application on the front end using jQuery and you'll have no hair by the end of the week.
Well, yeah, no.
But I think the long speech that I was
add
having.
one thing to that. So just so that you guys know, there are two ways of doing things. One is called imperative, one is declarative. Imperative is jQuery, declarative is React and probably Angular 2. The difference is in imperative you actually tell how something is done to achieve it. And in declarative you say, okay, do this, but you never tell how to do it. It's up to the library to do it. So as you can imagine, it will take much less code if you don't actually tell how to do something. You just say, okay, do this. How you do it is up to React or Angular or whichever Vue.js. In jQuery you actually tell that you are supposed to do this.
Yeah, you tell it what to do rather than how to do, which absolutely. But just the thing I was trying to cram in the first 10 seconds was that I think Angular 1 left a really bad taste in a lot of developers' mouths because it was something that was really ambitious, and first attempts usually fail, and it did, and it was a complete rewrite when Angular 2 came out. But React came shortly after, and React is tackling much simpler problems. It's a much narrower focus that it has. It's just all it does is render, update the model. That's all it does. Update the DOM.
Sorry, I expect a fight when someone's as soon as something just does something, like I'm ready.
I feel like we're making Angular.
I think that our moderators are
That being said, should probably move on to the questions. You guys can kill each other later.
No. I was going to make Angular seem better.
But all I was trying to say is that Angular tries to solve a lot more problems than React. And as such, it took a long time to actually get proper solutions to all of these questions. So it actually took about 2 years where React was coexisting with Angular 1. And Angular 1 fails compared to React in tons of different metrics, be it performance or the problems that it solves. So yeah, I mean, now people like...
All right.
Well, we should probably...
Yeah, let's get to the question.
That being said, I mean, that's a pretty good way to lead into this question, actually. But yeah, what are the noticeable differences between the two frameworks? Benefits, deficits, and since you were kind of on a roll,
Role is complete.
I formulated a very strong opinion of this over the last couple of weeks, and I know for a fact that there are people on this panel that disagree with this. So it's a good starting point. I've always been a pragmatic programmer, so I always choose my applications based on the ask of the client, and generally, as much as possible, what environments they're already accustomed to using, and then also the availability of the skill set of the developers, and all sorts of technical strategy stuff that technical managers have to deal with that developers don't. So I haven't explored React in any great detail until a couple of weeks ago when I jumped on, started at the new position at Idea Rebel, and everyone on my team is pro-React. Every single developer on my team is pro-React, and every developer that I've interviewed to bring on board, including the one that's trying not to laugh right now, is pro-React. And so they basically told me I lost the war and I've had to dig deeper into React. And what I found is, very complementary to what you were saying, is Angular is a complete solution. It is one large complete solution. And what I was saying earlier is, there is a way, and I use the air quotes way because I'm notorious for breaking the right way of doing things all the time. I'm very insistent on knowing the right way of doing it and then taking a sledgehammer to it after you know the right way of doing it. But there's a way. So if you lack structure, if you lack confidence, if you're not sure where to go, Google supports Angular, and there's a really clear documentation for Angular, and it's a one-stop shop to find the way to do the things you want to do. And then I started pouring into React, and I found out, well, React's just a library. It's not a framework. It only handles a very small subset of things. And then people added, the community added, so React, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is primarily a Facebook property, or it was developed by Facebook developers. And then the community added React routing to give it routing capabilities. And then I think there's like 3 different options for testing. And then there's Redux for state control. And as I started pouring through it, I realized that not only were there different methods to doing things, but there were also different choices for the plugins that you could use to compensate for the gaps between Angular and React, which led me to believe that there's a lot more choice in React, which is great if you are a senior level developer that can conceptualize and understand and see what you want to build before you get into it. But I feel like for either a team or someone that isn't there yet, can't see the application before they build it, it might be easier to learn Angular because of how rigid. TypeScript is, you should type your variables, and it's strictly written, and it's very, very strict about how you have to lay things out and for everything to work properly. And I don't know fully how that contrasts with React.
What's the term like in terms of, because apparently Angular is supposed to be backwards compatible to some extent?
From two on.
That's what I mean, yeah. But how long can that last, right? Like, isn't...
I was really pissed off when I wrote a bunch of directives in 2 to find out that the directives were no longer treated like components in a further release, and that upset me quite a bit.
Breaking changes occurred during the beta releases, but now with Angular 4, long-term support has officially been declared by Google, which is it's like finally. It's like only at this point can you consider Angular truly mature. So you can.
But does that mean coexisting APIs? You know, so the most notorious worst person in this space is React Router, because they dramatically changed their API from 2 to 3, and I don't know, from 1 to 2, and then
Also 3 to 4.
and then 3 to 4. For the better, for the greater good, in my opinion. But I totally understand that, you know, you're okay, I'm going to pick it up, and then you do it, and you don't know which version you are. So it has that characteristic problem. But I'm not sure, now looking back on it. So one thing that's nice is that these are really kind of thin wrappers around basic concepts. So React Router is a very thin wrapper, especially number 4. Super thin wrapper around the history location API. All it does is subscribes to history changes, and then re-renders your React component.
Right.
And as discoveries like this are made in the JavaScript space, Angular or not, you know, how is Angular going to maintain? How are they going to continue to update? Are they just going to have like so many consecutive APIs?
I feel like it's a problem more for you guys than for us.
Yeah.
You're the ones that have like 3 different solutions, competing solutions for the same problem, and then one will die out and leave you hanging.
Well,
how's Angular?
Okay, so Angular fixes it because of TypeScript. Angular fixes it because of how high level of a language it is. So what you were talking about, declarative versus, what was the term you used? Imperative. Whereas when I learned it, when I was in university, it was low level, medium level, high level. And the lowest level language you can get is machine code. And that's where you're literally pushing 1s and 0s with like push operators. And god damn it if I ever have to go back there. And then as languages evolve, they get higher and higher level, and you're really not, at a certain point you're not even coding. Like I feel like we're still programming and coding, you know, using the languages that we're at, but as they evolve, most of the hard work and heavy lifting that some of us that have been in this industry a long time had to do is now completely handled by the higher level frameworks. So Angular is super ultra mega ultra high level. Like the abstraction layer between what the developer is working with on the TypeScript level is so far removed from the actual JavaScript that gets compiled and sent to the
Wait, let's be clear about one thing. TypeScript can be used in React just as easily as it can be.
No, but what I'm saying is the way Angular deals with it. So like the way Angular processes, the way Google is dealing with that issue is if there is an enhancement on the JavaScript level, they will include that behind the scenes. The calls on the front end won't change, and they'll introduce new NGs and new calls to take advantage of things without necessarily depreciating the old ones, because they have the freedom with a language that is that high level.
You can do the same with React. For example, if you're using ES6 and someday all the browsers start supporting ES6, then you'll just be making native calls, if you want to call it that. But otherwise, you'll just use a polyfill. But to a programmer, it wouldn't make any difference. You're still using, say, object.assign. If the browser doesn't support it, you'll have a polyfill. You'll probably have to manually do it, obviously, remove the polyfill, but you get the same benefit with that too. And I think we're talking more about TypeScript versus JavaScript rather than Angular versus React.
Well, to be fair,
But you can't use vanilla JavaScript with Angular.
You can.
In the newest version?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
you could. Nobody.
Nobody does.
Well, yeah, because all the support, all the documentation, and all the
Everything's
literature on the matter is in TypeScript. But that's a good thing.
You certainly could.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
But
Look, I was alarmed to find out that you no longer had to strictly type your variables.
You can actually
Like
do that with
that's-
JavaScript too. I think you have to add flow, and you can do that. So if you want that in React, you can do that.
You can do you could use Flow in Angular. Has anyone done that?
yeah,
We'll get to the hacky part after this.
Jeez, thanks.
to be fair, Flow does not solve that problem in the way that TypeScript does. It could theoretically. Flow isn't as developed as TypeScript is.
Oh,
Flow is not as
now
good.
we're fighting.
Okay, fair enough. You can disagree, but how many React projects use Flow in the real world? It's a small minority compared to the nearly 100% prevalence of TypeScript in Angular. You can expect an Angular developer to know TypeScript
Do
when
we
they join
have
the team.
do you guys know NPM charts? Can we put that on here? Because it'll show the relative differences of how things are being downloaded on NPM. That'd be great. I wish we just had that. Right now.
We had it in real time back.
Yeah, you can see. Like,
Okay, but we're making presumptions, but we can absolutely say with certainty that near 100% of Angular developers are using TypeScript, and we can say with almost near certainty that not 100% of React developers are using Flow. Is that safe to say?
I don't know if I can make that call or not. But you know what? I don't know if that's a good metric of the differences between Angular and React. Versus
It was just to answer the question, how is Google going to provide this long-term support? So you're asking because Google has put their stake in the ground. They're saying, we released the CLI, we released 4.
Yes, sorry.
So we're not going to break it.
I don't understand how, I don't understand how as improvements get made to just the core APIs, that they're going to support it long term, right? I mean, sometimes just new discoveries get made, right? That's why Angular 2 exists in the first place. Like, things change. So at some point, they're going to find something that's not compatible with the previous APIs.
Certain things don't change. I mean, as you said, the usage of browser history to implement a router will probably not change. I mean, that seems to be a solution that everybody's happy with. And at this point, I mean, new things are going to. The web audio API has recently surfaced. I mean, what API will we have to interact with that? That's a new question.
It's so fun to watch JavaScript catch up. I'm sorry, just every time I'm sorry, that's aside. I have such a hate on for Steve Jobs because of what happened to Flash developers because at the end of the day,
Me too.
yeah, because at the end of the day, it was what you put in the application that determined whether it was an efficient application or not. So what Steve Jobs did is he basically threw hundreds of thousands of developers under the bus for what was a political war with Adobe over control of media content. Basically, Flash gave you free access to TV that they want to sell in the store. And God, I was doing such amazing things with the sound, with the spectrograph and Flash tied into the bitmap engine that allowed me to make high performance render engines to render in crazy visual graphics. And this is a decade ago. And we're just getting there now with JavaScript. Sorry, it's a complete tag.
That wasn't a aside.
That was a complete
That was
aside.
an amazing aside.
Anyway, bringing it back to what we're talking about, this new introduction to the API. My argument is that these both React and Angular are maturing to the point where they're getting to maximum maturity. And the fact that if you look at high-level C-based languages, they haven't changed much in 15 years. What they're capable of doing, and the new libraries that are introduced extends those capabilities. But the way I'm starting to program architecturally, object-oriented programming conceptually with Angular now, and what I'm going to be doing with React with my team in the months to come, is very similar to what I was doing when I graduated in 1998. And I don't think when you study programming in university, you take philosophy classes, like logic. Like the basics of logic gates and true or false, none of that's going to change until quantum computing. So my argument is that, my argument is, I thought someone was like doing one of those bullshit. My argument is that these languages are at the point of maturity where I don't think it's going to be a problem for either set in like a few years' time, and then beyond that, none of them are going to exist in 5 years. So who cares?
And the least we can say is that at least Angular has made a commitment to try to preserve the API as is, so that.
I don't feel like Facebook cares about React as much as Google cares.
But React doesn't even make a statement about this, because React is not concerned with the APIs that he's talking about. He's talking about peripherals as far as React is concerned. So at least if you're looking for longevity of your API, you have a better shot with Angular. If something like the browser history API were to change, I mean, at least Angular will try to make an effort to preserve your current API.
Well, what happens if Facebook buys a company that has a better framework and they ditch React altogether, and Facebook no longer supports React?
Well,
then what happens to React?
We all use Preact.
Anyway.
But that's an interesting point, though, because I think it's a tougher job for Angular to do that. So does Facebook or do the React developers have a commitment to keep the API the same? They absolutely do. And in fact, they did that with their big update from 15 to 16. They changed the entire guts of the entire library are completely different. Every single function call and method that's different underneath the hood is different now. It's like a completely different reconciliation algorithm. The API is exactly the same. They work really hard to make sure the API is the same now. It's a very small API surface in comparison to routing as a peripheral for React. But then that's why, in my mind, that problem isn't solved by Angular being more committed to it. They're just digging themselves the same hole that they did with the Angular 1, where now they're going to need to maintain an API that's complex.
Yeah, I don't know.
Another point is that, with Angular is that because they made that commitment, if they want to make an improvement, their hands are tied. They can't do that, right? If Facebook wants to do something, they're like, okay, this is a breaking change. We're going to make this change. You can probably keep on using React 16, but from React 18 we'll be doing things this way. And
I think they'll be disappointing their developers just as much if they did that. I don't think they would.
Let's look at the introduction of Angular animation with the release of the CLI. It didn't break the old ways of animating things. Like I don't think that it's a bloated large framework. I don't think they're going to not introduce Angular. It's a mature, like to say it's not bloated would be ignorant, right? It's like a big, giant, lumbering. It has to be. Come on, look at everything it does. The documentation wasn't even finished. I don't even know if it still is finished. But up until 4, they didn't even write down what everything did yet. It's huge.
At least now there is a documentation that takes from step 1 to step N in how to create your web application. Whereas in React, where you have to scour through articles.
I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying that we'd be fooling ourselves not to say that Angular is not big and bloated. It has to be by the nature of its size and the speed at which development happens. The reason Google has an aggressive schedule is because of how quickly they're trying to get it out. And I'm sure performance will increase over time and so on and so forth. But it's a beast. It is. It's not from a dev standpoint, but from like a...
Your application will be a beast in React 2 after you add all the peripherals.
I'm not saying it's a negative. You're being super defensive. I'm not saying it as a negative. I'm saying it as a matter of fact. Just the size of it.
I don't know.
And I can't even remember what we were originally talking about.
I think
Benefits and deficits on both sides, but. I think
No, but it was
probably-
in this bang. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
let's move on. Sorry.
It's okay, don't worry. No, this was interesting though. I mean, especially when you guys got into deeper aspects of it when it comes to a company level. Which,
Well, that before we move on, I really want to know, like, does Facebook care? Because like it really feels like Google really cares. Like as much as people, because like the one guy asked me, he said go do the NPM stats and like look at how many polls for Angular and how many polls for React, and you'll see that React has won, the war is over, people have decided, which I'm not saying is true, it's just the thing. But in spite of that, Google's like Angular, new releases, we're going to support it, we're working on it. I don't, as I said, it's not in my face, does Facebook
Actually,
care?
Google has a really bad history of abandoning projects. So, yeah, so you can always expect them to do that, so I wouldn't really count on it. Google could sit down tomorrow, you know what, we have a better framework and we don't care about Angular, so it's not like...
Fair enough, but my question is, is Facebook doing the
Who are
same
you?
thing?
Are you asking like, is Mark Zuckerberg care? Like, there's a small team. The React team I think is 8 people.
Okay.
They from everything I can tell, they're very committed to the project, from a lot more reasons than just web. You know, the React Native has really taken off. The core React library, which is just like the diffing logic, can be used with any custom render. So now they have React VR, and there's some React animation libraries that are specific to certain types of targets, like 4K and that kind of thing, which is really cool. So they have a lot of players out in the field that care about the core project, but because React got so popular and it took off so much, there are all these projects that are like offshoots of React. And so me personally, I think that I would switch to any one of these offshoot projects in a second. I don't personally care about React. The Inferno or Preact with Preact Compat has like the exact same API as React. It's made in Ontario.
So it's Vue, if you care to use it that way.
Has the
Okay,
same
so
API
then-
as mine.
Pretty much the same API as React. I mean, you can
Is that true? No, I thought it was-
you can use Vue with a render function and so forth.
Okay, cool.
But okay, so this is interesting. And do you think that if React was to be abandoned, do you feel like the community, because I agree with you, right now the scope of the community is huge. Do you think the community would like galvanize and create basically the Linux of React and create a stable, single open source path, or would you think it would splinter? Because you're saying there's all these alternatives. Like what happens?
I think the cat's out of the bag. I think that's the thing. So, you know, historically, I think it's worth pointing out where Angular 1 and React, where the difference was. And one of the big ones was modules. Angular 1 came out, there was no import, export, there was no require on the front end. Browserify was not really a thing yet. So it had to create its own very complex injection system. And that was really the days when hating JavaScript made perfect sense. But now we're in a post-module world. Importing, exporting modules is the same that you do in every other language. And files are very small. Components are really easy to manage. That's why I think the distance between Angular and React is really just quite short now compared to how it used to be. And so whether it's do I think the open source community will go with the exact API that React has? No, I think that they'll come up with something very similar that are like these very small virtual DOM component-based libraries. I mean, there's web components around the corner, but that's been taking a really long time to take up. Web components is that space. It's the greater spec community trying to do it for everybody. But I think that the fact that React is as popular as it is and all these offshoot libraries, I think to some extent we will see, at least for until it's the next major innovation, you know, we will see something that's more akin to a React API more than we will the Angular fork.
I don't think there's reason to believe at this point anyway that either of these technologies are going to die out anytime soon. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be here to begin with. We all have faith that they will continue to exist, and they seem to have a lot of support and use.
Okay, I want to know, what is the main selling point? So you said Angular is bloated. That's not a selling point. It has everything. It uses TypeScript.
Hey, guys.
No, but so,
I'm a pragmatic individual.
So what is-
to be honest?
what is the thing that you would tell to everyone in the room to be like, you should definitely for this particular, what does a project need for it to necessitate using Angular over React?
For me, it was proprietary data. The last time I selected Angular over React, and I was strongly considering React, was the company I was working for was working on a new analytics algorithm that they invested an unbelievable amount of money to develop. And there was some question between React and the ecosystem around React as to how much of the proprietary system we were building was going to be exclusively ours. And even though the risk was like minute, just the fact that there were more players, like just the fact that I had to consider more things legally made me go to Angular, because it was one thing and the licensing was clear and I could send it to all the legal departments and I could get it cleared and it was easy. Whereas it was React, it just would have been a lot more work, and at the end of the day I truly don't see a huge difference in the output between the two frameworks. And so if I have available developers and the output's going to be the same, it could be something as simple as an administrative reason that I would choose one over the other. I have other reasons as to why I think people should learn Angular first, but that's separate from why I would choose it as a platform.
I have a double-pronged answer for you. One is that solutions have been reached, all the experimentation of the React community has filtered down into the mature platform that Angular 4 now is. And you don't have to solve the problems that have already been solved in the past. You can just read Google's way and follow it. And it might not be exactly the beautiful, functional programming code that you saw in some YouTube tutorial that you thought looked really nice, but it's sturdy and reliable. And if you're not solving a new technical problem that requires your hands to be free of all convention, and it requires you to experiment and be able to break the rules, as so many of us like to do, you can trust Angular 4, presumably, hopefully. It seems so this way at this point, that that the guidance that they provide is good. And along the same lines, when you hire somebody new and they say, I'm an Angular developer, I've worked in Angular projects in the past, you have a very good reason to believe that they will understand your project, that they'll be able to read it and know their way around, they'll be able to contribute immediately. You have command line tools that will write code for you. You can review their code and see if they follow the patterns appropriately. If you hire a designer, they don't have to be a JavaScript expert. They can just write CSS and HTML. The team building aspect is facilitated by a structural framework like Angular 4.
This kind of sounds like it's playing into our next question, which is pretty much about the learning curve for both. Would both React and Angular be able to elaborate on that, or
So,
have we already touched a bit of that so far?
I mean, from my perspective, there's Angular prior to the CLI and Angular post CLI. Does everybody know what I mean by CLI first before I continue? All right. In case anyone doesn't, command line interface. And the Angular CLI lets you declare your project, what type of CSS processor you want to use, whether you're including a common CSS framework, all in one line. And then adding a component or a directive or a module, again, is one line within the CLI. And the majority of the connectivity and interdependencies are already pre-written and generated for you. And so, like, it's so fast. Like, from the time I start a new app to when I'm actually coding to actually make something do something is virtually no time anymore. And before, I would always be hesitant to spin up Angular because of the amount of overhead and time it would take me to set up the project. I don't know if that's the same case for React at this point, but I do know that that's crazy. Like, just, it scares me because in the wrong hands, I feel like you should know the plumbing, but Angular is really like doing the plumbing for you these days.
Let me flip the question on you. What are the deal makers? What makes you pick React at this point?
Sure. So I find that it's simple. It's very, very simple. It allows me to architect an application, small or large, in a way that is sort of the same across the level of complexity. Like when you're looking at the application from a very high level, it has this sort of simplicity that you can follow. It's really easy to fold out. There's only one type of unit in React. There's just the component. There's only these things you can do with the component, and that's it. So.
But Angular has components too.
Oh no,
I will agree with you on this, because Angular, I don't understand. Like, one of the greatest things about Flash, AS2 and AS3 was it didn't matter what symbol you chose, because at the end of the day, if you understood the programming languages, they were all extensions of the same display object. Everybody remembers display object, and then you could have a sprite or a movie clip, and the difference between a sprite and a movie clip is one had a timeline and one didn't, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, they were all objects, and it didn't matter. You could call it Cinderella. It didn't matter. It was an object. And I find that Angular has added terminology that is completely unnecessary. All we need are components. Smaller components act like directives, bigger components act like modules. But why do we need to call them different things when they're structured essentially the same? So, like, to the counter argument to that, the simplicity that you're seeking is there in Angular. But for the sake of the strictness of the language and to better define things, the inheritance that you were unsure about whether it existed in Angular absolutely does exist. But that inheritance is this separation between these base objects within the framework.
Yeah, so the reason I would pick React is it's kind of similar to what he said, that whenever I look at a page, I can just picture that as components. And it's nothing but components. It's a hierarchy of component that is rendered into a document, and that maps very nicely onto a Redux tree, which is the state, where you basically store the state. So for me to picture that, for example, if I'm looking at this, just at this, I can just picture exactly what my whole React app is going to look like, what my state tree is going to look like, and it's very simple for me to conceptualize. And I can just start programming. And I'll just add one more thing, because you mentioned that Angular has a CLI. React actually didn't up until a year ago, but now they have added that, so that roadblocks out of the way, and you can just use the CLI, start an app, and just start coding. So I just find that so simple, and the way it's structured, it's very easy for me to understand. It's just a component. If I need a bigger component, I'll just compose it, and that's it.
Are you talking about create a React app for the CLI?
Yes.
I haven't used the latest versions of it, but last time I used it, it only allowed you to create an application. But does it, provide commands to create a new component? Or
No, it doesn't. That's a major difference. It does not.
It doesn't write the code for you, pretty much.
Yes.
Angular will literally write the code for you.
Yeah, so there are tools to do that. So what you would do is, for example, if I need to create a component, I'll actually give it a template. So I would do something like, I think it's called prog or something, I forgot the name. So just give, it's just a command line. So you say, I think it's prog. So say it's prog, so prog, component name, and it will actually do the whole thing. It will create the CSS for you, the whole template for the component, and anything you tell it to, basically.
Is that another add-on, or is that within
I'm not
Create?
sure if it's shipped as part of the React CLI, but it's definitely a separate, it's separate.
Okay, so to bring it back to your question, the reason I would recommend it, so if you are a developer that is a seasoned developer that understands design patterns, that understands high-level programming concepts, then it really is your choice whether you learn React or Angular, in my opinion, because React is going to be looser, but you can harness that with your brain. If you are more junior and some of the concepts we're talking about are really hard for you to understand, or you're not following along, I think I have to recommend Angular first, because it's all one thing. It's one documentation. There's no choices you need to make. There's no question as to whether it's built into the CLI. It's just there. And so I've been an academic way too many times, because I have no degrees, but I've been a professor 3 times. And so I've had to teach a lot of people. And I spend a lot of time studying psychology and how tired people get from change. And so the fewer variables someone needs to consider when they're learning, the easier it is to learn. So my opinion, and you guys share your own, but if you have that background of design thinking, then pick your poison.
Do you
But if
guys-
it's
I'll
in
just
you-
add one.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll just add one thing. I think the word we're looking for is opinionated and non-opinionated. So it seems like that Angular is very opinionated. It tells you how to do something. When it comes to React, I mean, I don't want to say it, but it's kind of all over the place. I mean, you can pick Redux for your state management. You can pick MobX. There are a few other libraries, but nobody really uses them. But the actual winners are Redux, and to an extent MobX. So if you're starting, it is a bit overwhelming. So you'll probably say, okay, how should I do CSS? And 10 people will have 10 different opinions, and you will probably have to do it 10 different ways to come up with your own opinion, right? I mean, you'll say, okay, this works for me. So in the beginning, I would say it's a bit difficult, but that's the power of React.
I would say there's two drawbacks from that. One is that, yeah, you need to go in with a philosophy because React doesn't provide that for you. So
Yeah,
one is that you could, take a route that turns out not to have been the best path later down the road, and that can happen to the best of us. We can happen to Google with Angular 1. And then the second is that, say you make all the right decisions and you have, a philosopher king amongst your developers that, knows where to take the project. Now, this person is tasked with leading all the other developers and following the right path and of reprimanding them when they step out of line, pretty much. Whereas if you believe that the Angular approach is good enough, then your top developer can focus on application-centric questions and just tell the juniors, just read the documentation, just ask Google how to do things.
Oh, I really hate that comment because it means that you work for a shitty company.
How so?
Well, because if you're not, look, everything I know is useless in 18 months. Everything you know now is useless. If you've been in this industry long enough, you know that. All of our knowledge gets refreshed every 18 months. So if you're not at a company that encourages a cycle of learning from the most junior to the most senior, and that knowledge isn't spread naturally, it's a shitty company, and you need to get to a new company.
But how is telling somebody to read the up-to-date documentation on Angular?
It would be way more holistic. It doesn't need to be that rigid. I'm sorry, this is, in my opinion, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about now. This has everything to do with DevOps.
Sorry,
and how you structure your
I have a
company.
specific question about the learning curve part. Does anything there, the new one? I leafed through it, but it uses still. Would you say it's common for people to use like the ng, or like they have all the different type of directives?
Yeah.
You can say like ng4 with the asterisks and the brackets and all that good stuff. So there's a DSL that you learn when you're writing Angular. So I would say that as from a small comparison, I consider that to be a bit of a steepish learning curve. I don't know how steep it is actually, but
They're pretty benign.
Yeah.
They're really benign, and what you would need to do in React is a similar type of markup. They're just
No?
Angular's really good at branding, I guess.
But so React doesn't have anything. React, the only thing React has is just open curly braces. It's the only one.
And I'll grant you that point, to be honest.
Okay.
In my opinion, I think the templating system for Angular, you could just do it with JavaScript, as you said.
I heard you can put in JSX into it. Is that true? Is that the
In Angular?
In Angular, yeah, you can use JSX.
You can write your Angular like JSX. It's so not that different. You have when you use the CLI, it's automatically going to break up your component or object into 3 files: your CSS file, your HTML file, and your JavaScript file. But your HTML file is linked to the JavaScript file through the template property, and it is, what I was saying, technically a virtual DOM. So it's just, and a lot of people will just write it all in one file, and you can just write it all in one file. A lot of the tutorials show you to write it all in one file. It's just counterintuitive to the CLI. But it's just not that different. Like the one thing that I will say is between JSX and templating, you can do JSX style templating using Angular. And it's just not, from what I've seen, just not that different.
All right. Well, pretty much got a question about the ecosystems on both ends. So, which ecosystem has the most community support? And
React.
React. Well,
That's an easy
what
one.
is
focused or unfocused?
What is-
React has a much larger depth.
What is the Angular ecosystem of? Okay, so all right.
It's Angular.
No, I know. So
To the pro Angular's though.
Well, no, but
That's a
what
good
is
challenge.
the Angular ecosystem? It's Angular. It's Angular.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think what happens is that React gets all the shiny new toys, and then half of them end up like being proven to not be a good toy. And the ones that actually matured, like Redux, remember how many implementations of the Flux pattern there were back in the day? And Redux is the only survivor. And now there's Redux for Angular. Angular will just curate everything that the React community does. So by the time it seats down,
Which is completely true.
What about
We're just
like
gonna steal it
okay,
anyway.
sure, those are like the really high level stuff in Redux. But I just say, okay, I want a date picker. You know, like so is there just like a you know? If I just type React date picker into something, you know, I'll get like 10 different choices. So what is like that? What's the Angular equivalent there?
It's not as good.
I think
It's certainly not as
I'm not.
good.
I don't even mean that. I'm curious.
I will. You know what I will say, and you can have a differing opinion, but I've found that Angular developers online are pretentious as pretentious AF. No, because they don't explain simple things in simple ways. Like again, having been in and out of academia for decades, like normalizations are like. And TLAs are the two things I hate the most. So 3-letter acronyms and made-up words that you add shun and pre to at the beginning to make yourself satisfied. And I have a point to this. Sorry. Well, seriously.
Actually, here's maybe I'll help you a little bit. So, because of the polls and all that, and usually they're always favoring React over Angular, does it really affect your decision for the go-to, or is it?
Well, no, because any developer that's worth their salt that can do React can do Angular, and any developer worth their salt that can do Angular can do React. Because it's about the concepts and the design patterns. If you're just a scripter, you're going to struggle no matter where you are, and you're going to be completely reliant on your teammates to tell you exactly what you need to do. Like, if you're using Angular or React to build a very simple, basic application, you're probably not using it for the right thing. And so you're automatically going into larger scale applications that require thought and planning, and then you would really hope that any developer working on it has those conceptual chops behind it. So I've had to convert, and again, because of the Flash fiasco, but like some of the people that were Flash developers that worked with me in New York at the time, Manny Tan is now like one of the lead creative technologists for Google, working on experimental interfaces, and he was the guy responsible for Windows 8 and the tiles, because he went there because he was an experimenter in Flash, and when Flash started dying, I got him to work on an Objective-C project, and that made him confident to know that his conceptual skills were transferable, and then programming languages didn't matter anymore. And that's where all of you need to get to, by the way. Like, this whole thing is, to a certain point, trivial and ridiculous, because none of this is going to matter in 5 years. And unfortunately, we're going to start living longer and longer and longer. And so the time span between things you need to learn are going to get shorter and shorter, and the more things you need to learn are going to get broader and broader. And so I don't try to sweat a lot of the nuance that we're arguing about, because it's going to be fucking useless in a few years, right? Am I wrong?
The developer cycle.
Am I wrong? Please tell me if I'm wrong, but that's been my philosophy for 20 years and it's served me well.
So tell you, do you feel the same way about it? Or?
Well, the question was, how many things does the community provide you with? How many, like, you want a date picker? How many versions of date pickers are there to choose from? Well, first of all, obviously there are Angular date pickers. That's a pretty fundamental little widget.
Sure, yeah.
Let's say you want another widget that is, less common, and perhaps the React community has a better solution for that. And I'll grant you that, to be honest. There's more kind of open source widgets out there and solutions to general problems. But I don't know if you'll agree with this, but in my opinion, the biggest challenge of software development isn't how to build a date picker. It's how to manage the complexity of a growing application as you need to make changes and react to the market. and have it not have the technical debt not accumulate to a point where any new investment in terms of labor is completely unfeasible.
Right, but the question of the day picker is valid because that's what these guys are searching for, right? Like when you're starting and you're just trying to, you're grasping, right? You're like, well, how the fuck do I do this? And you Google, well, how do I do this? Again, please clap if I'm right and boo if I'm wrong. Like, but seriously, like when you are, who here is learning this stuff for the first time? Please raise your hands. Seriously, only 4 of you are learning this stuff for the first time? Good for the rest of you. When you're searching, do you say, okay, I need to do this thing, and you Google, how do I do this thing in Angular or React? Raise your hands if you've ever done that. Only 2, 3? Either you're all lying or you're embarrassed as hell to raise your hand.
Even if they're just dipping their toes into these actual technologies, maybe even front-end development in general, they probably have an idea going in on what they want, this business model to be, or what they want their product to be. And those, I mean, they'll find how to make the widget after a few Google searches. But what they won't find is how to maintain their application growing in a healthy manner, such that they can add more people to the team and so forth.
Absolutely, but my point is what they will find under widget, they will need so much knowledge before they can, like what's presented as this is how you do a day picker in Angular, someone with no Angular experience couldn't follow that tutorial. Like the base tutorials that the community puts out for Angular are too complex for people just starting in Angular. And I think that's the point of your question. In React, yeah, you're going to get 1,000 shitty day pickers, but each one will give someone a little bit of knowledge on how that system works.
Maybe let me rephrase the question. I'm just curious, like, how much of that stuff is there? Like, I'm not like, is it how easy
Not
it is
as
or how
much.
technical? No, I know, but I mean,
Like you'll get 1 or 2 results. for
okay, so let me
everything.
give an analogous thing.
So how does it work with, oh, sorry.
I was just saying, so there's like, both Bootstrap and material design and a whole bunch of other stuff. They're implemented in both Angular and React. But is this like something that's like prevalent in the Angular communities, or are there lots of individual? Is it easy? Is it just like npm installing something and then just putting? Okay,
Of course.
yeah, and then okay, so it's.
So whatever you want, you can just go onto npm and find it and just start using
Well,
it.
the question, the discrepancy is in the whatever you want,
Okay.
right? You might have less options, perhaps. I mean, it'd be great to have the npm stats, as you said. I don't know exactly how it compares, but you could say that there's more experimentation in the React community, and as a result, you have more variety.
Well, it's a higher barrier because it's TypeScript and because it's a high-level language. It's a higher barrier to fiddle and throw things out there.
However, I'd like to counter the point that was made earlier, forget by who, that it's more difficult to digest a tutorial or an explanation of how to do something, or read the code of a widget in Angular 4 because it's more complex, whereas a React widget might be more straightforward. However, all the Angular widgets will follow a particular pattern. They'll all be done in the Angular way. So you read one, when you finally manage to understand it, you'll probably understand them all. Whereas React widgets might all have their different approaches.
Yeah, I suppose I could see that. I guess it's one way you're banging your head against the wall until you finally break through and then you understand everything. And the other way is you're trying to get a picture, but it's like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and you're.
What about okay, so there's the libraries out there, the little things you can choose about. What about the just actual community ecosystem support? So like people actually putting issues, Slack channels. So React-to-Flux is like the biggest Discord channel, but all the guys from React Router and other people hanging out there. Is there a growing like grassroots Angular party channel?
I wouldn't be aware of it if there is one.
I mean,
So
yeah,
I'm
I mean,
the one person to ask.
there are Slack channels. There's all that. I mean, if you look at the trends on GitHub, for example, of contributions to related repositories, you'll see that React is higher, but it's not like Angular doesn't appear in the chart. It's there. You might have a third of the number of contributions or something like that. But obviously, there is an open source. It's software that lives on GitHub in the open source world. I mean, it's the same people that exist in both universes.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Would it be fair to say that React has more libraries and more community support because Angular provides everything out of the box and React doesn't?
Can you?
So the question was, does React have more of a community support because or does Angular have less community support because Angular provides more stuff? So you just like a more single source of place where you go to. You don't have to like go outside of the community. I mean, that's probably true in a lot of small ways, because when React came out, they were like, this is it. That's all you can do. So a lot of people had to come up with their own solutions, and so it also became a really easy way to contribute. If you tried to contribute before there was such a thing as React components, then I don't know, it's kind of hard because you have to use Bower and all that stuff.
I simply think it has more support because more people use React. So I think if you have like 3 times more people using React, you'll have probably 3 times more contributors, 3 times. I think it's just simply, the simple reason is that more people use React.
You'll get a response.
That's my personal
faster.
opinion.
On Stack Overload, you will get a comment faster with React.
So, Jeff, okay.
Stack Overflow.
What's that?
Oh,
So I don't know what that question was. So there's a lot of mention about how strict Angular is and how it kind of solves the architecture problem for you. If that's true, why does Angular Redux and Angular GraphQL all exist? Why are they trying to steal outside patterns?
That's a great question.
Well, I don't see it necessarily as stealing it. So for like,
But why would they need it? Why wouldn't they say, we have our way, we don't want your way? And does that influence the whole homogeneity?
well, this goes back to the question about the evolution of JavaScript as a whole, right? So the requirement of sophisticated state control over sophisticated applications is a relatively new thing.
But Angular forward.
Well, what I would say is that state management is one of the things that Angular doesn't fully solve for you. There are some things that are left up to the developers and make sense, different approaches make sense for different applications. But the same thing is true in React. I mean, you have some people that never extend the React component class and that always use functional components. In Angular, you'll have a service, but what happens inside the service is up to you. I mean, that was the limit, that was the line that they drew, where they're like, we're not going to insert our opinions further than that. And Redux is an answer to that. Redux is a way of managing state in your application.
But it's modified and fully incorporated in the latest version, right? Like it's NG Core and I don't remember. There's 2 components in the latest version build of Angular that completely incorporate Redux into the framework as part of it, and they're very open about that as basically a raw. I don't know enough about how it was developed to say it was the Redux team, but they're very open about how it's basically a theft of the concept, but fully baked into the Angular framework. It's not something you need to download separately.
And there you go, that's relatively new.
It's super like ultra new, like
But
latest
my
release
question
new.
is, what is this structure that Angular is imposing that helps if state management and data fetching aren't part of it? Because those are the 2 most complicated parts of it now.
Well, for example, when you go on the CLI and you say, I need a new component, it'll give you all the files, it'll give you the test file. Your testing environment is already set up for each one of your components. Your service injection and dependency tree is taken care of. Lazy loading is taken care of for you. You don't have to load all of your parts at once. Routing is taken care of for you. The actual nitty-gritty of making sure that you're loading the right things at the right time and that you're not loading more than you have to. HTTP requests are taken care of for you with observables, using the best approaches that the community has deemed at this point in time to be the best solution. So observables are throughout the Angular framework now pretty much the way that you there's no more callbacks or promises, it's all observables. It's just the right way to do things, and what you end up with when you use the right tools in a React project.
So to kind of simplify it more, it's not that Angular was opposed to it and then they had to steal it and incorporate it. It's the philosophy between the 2 camps. Google wants to provide you a one-stop shop. So if React or the React community comes up with something that is useful for single-page applications, and Google goes, yeah, that would be useful within Angular, they're going to incorporate it fully into the framework so that you have full access to it through the CLI, and all the testing and everything that you need to do to automate that project is baked into it. Whereas with React, you're going to have to use different programs and things to test various aspects of your applications and make sure it's all connected. So it's not a, and that's kind of the point that sorry, I forget your name.
Seth.
set that was making much earlier is like, oh, we'll just steal it. But that's what everybody does, right? Like when a design pattern or a technique becomes popular, it's just whether Angular is going to assimilate it into what is Angular or whether it's going to be kept separate. And in the case of React, it's often kept separate, and Google is aggressively eating up all these things and adding it to a more robust, complete framework, if that makes sense.
Actually, to bring it back, does performance influence the choice when it comes to the two frameworks, when it comes to like?
I'm a bad person to ask. The answer for me is no, because I work in advertising, which means you have the constant force of the marketing people that want a 4K site with like crazy high quality video, and like you need like, you know, an OC3 connection in your backyard in order to see it, and like the IT department that wants every image to be below 25 kilobytes. So when it comes to CPU cycles, it's like the last thing on my mind. So I'm backing out of this stuff.
Would you like the React guys?
I mean, I do care about performance, but I honestly don't know if Angular is good at or bad at it, so I don't know. But one thing that I did look at was the file size. So Angular library zip is something like 350 or 400 KB. React is less than 100, but for React to work, you need to import other libraries like Redux and all the other stuff. So if you add all of that, I don't think there will be a huge difference between the two. But yeah, I do care about performance, but only when I'm working on VM. So I'll make an app and I'll make sure that it's highly performant, and I actually do focus on that a lot.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, what we're measuring against are things like Think Google and other standards of mobile and speed and loading. And if it's failing, regardless of what technology you use.
Well, I don't know to what extent that's true. So React Native, I don't do a lot of mobile stuff. So personally, it's the small differences in performance aren't that super important. I do some animations with lots of SVGs on the screen, and some of the things that I've done with React. So if you're like setting state at 60 frames per second, it'll slow a little chunk. Yeah. So there are things that there are hackier ways of getting good performance in React that are not as clear if you're sort of going all in on React, like especially like dispatching actions. But that being said, I don't know if that, yeah, so like you kind of have to like leave the React ecosystem a little bit to improve the performance. I know when React first came out, there was a lot of talk about how it was faster, and I'm certain that all the benefits that React has are not about its performance. However, Fiverr just came out, so that supposedly gives developers the ability to continuously refresh the screen without ever causing problems. So.
What just came out? Sorry.
React 16 is a really cool system if you haven't heard about it. So the way that if you have a very, very large component tree and you're trying to update, I don't know, like 1,000 things at once, then you're doing 1,000 cascading changes. And so, you know, just imagine you have a really large array and you're reducing over it. There's a synchronous cost you pay that might block the screen as you're moving up and down. React 15 was the last version of that. React 16 has a different version where it actually kind of keeps track of how much work you've done. So if you have a 1,000 element array, it won't call reduce, which goes from all. It'll actually do a while loop and use a really cool browser callback called request idle callback. And it'll say, do as much work as you can in the request idle callback period, let the browser render, and then keep trying to render your
that's
tree.
fantastic.
It's like we got a switch.
No, because well, like I said, like I don't run a democracy, but I don't run a dictatorship. So when like 5 of my 10 devs want React and the other 5 don't care, we're gonna do React. But yeah, like no, anything that can improve render times on browsers, especially like that's a big deal. That is a big deal if you're doing anything that's graphically important. Right there.
Or on mobile, you know, you're trying to scroll.
Yeah, because everything's so much scroll on mobile. Like we're dealing with performance issues, and we aren't using React or Angular, but we're dealing with performance issues on a major e-com launch. And part of it is because of the way the platform is constantly trying to re-render things on the screen. And if we had a framework that had that feature, we wouldn't be dealing with the issue right now as it stands. And so
So
I'm looking into that later.
So the latest benchmark, I think the last ones I saw were this summer, showed that the latest versions of Angular and React were pretty comparable in terms of just raw performance. So they basically made these like really long, really big component hierarchies and really big tables and tested to see how fast they could update with new rows and whatnot. And React has a bit of an edge, but we're talking a very slim margin.
Like cycles.
Right,
Cycles.
exactly. However, if you go back a couple of years when you have React versus Angular 1, it's not even.
There was like a 15% hit on Angular and it was brutal.
Right, right. However, and the other thing that, just the raw size of the JavaScript compiled file, the build, yes, it's much bigger in Angular. There's things that can be done. So Angular offers a lot of tools for improving the performance of your page. You have ahead of time compilation. You can use tree shaking to get rid of a lot of that excess bundle size that you don't actually use. And TypeScript assists with that because it helps the compiler to get rid of things that you're not using. You have to do a little bit of reading in order to perfectly optimize your Angular application because it's a little bit more complex. The change detection system in Angular is more complex and more sophisticated than React. React is so simple that they can do things like React Fiber, where the API stays the same, but you dramatically increase performance. However, in Angular, you have to kind of look at their suggested steps to take to improve the performance of a particular part of your page. However, the good news is the answers are there. You just look up, on Google's documentation, what are the steps that I can take to improve performance. And a lot of these are pretty straightforward. Whereas, if you have a React app with, different third-party libraries attached, and you're trying to improve performance, it's perhaps a tougher job in some circumstances.
Okay, so how easy is it to actually optimize an Angular app? The reason I'm asking this is, for example, to optimize a React app, you really have to understand how the React engine works, right? You have to know. So, okay, so how does it decide whether to update something or not, and how many times it's going to render something? So you have to totally understand that, and once you do, you can kind of optimize things around it.
Yeah.
So with Angular, is it like, do you really have to know how the plumbing works? Or is it like, okay, Google says that step 1, this, step 2, this, step, you follow this and it's performance?
It's a yes to both. I mean, it helps to be acquainted with how it works, and it can be complex, it can get hairy. There's something called ng zones, which is the Angular application of the zones library, which basically tracks a callback sequence throughout the JavaScript execution, which is kind of a complex approach, much more complex than React's virtual DOM approach. However, it's yes to the second question too. You can, for example, implement on-push change detection, which means that your components will wait for you to actually update the object reference of its parameters, and you pretty much have like what in React they deem a functional component, where it will just kind of sit there and not update until explicitly told to do so by an update of its parameters. So there are steps you can take by just following a 1, 2, 3 cookbook. But yeah, I mean, if you want to be an Angular ninja, then you would have to get into some topics that perhaps you wouldn't have to as a React dev.
The deeper you understand any system, the better you're going to be at manipulating it. Which is where innovation comes from. And that's like the next step. Like we're all talking about how to learn Angular and the right way is the way to learn React. But the truth is these are evolving technologies. And the more you understand them at the fundamental core, the more you can fuck with them.
Can I ask the React guys something? Oh, sorry, were you going to ask me?
Yeah, I had a couple more actually. Yeah, just for the sake of time. So pretty much one's mostly just focusing on teams. Teams need to be able to move fast and make quick changes. How does Angular and React pretty much compare on this?
Angular is so strictly coded and the patterns are so well defined that you can pop people in and out of a project if they know Angular pretty damn easily. I know it's not that simple with React.
Oh, I was going to say on the contrary, I feel like I can pop someone in that doesn't even know JavaScript. And this is something that I've had to work with people that that didn't know very much code. Like they didn't know the ecosystems. They didn't like, you know, we have a co-op student who came in. He picked. And if anything, this is a guy that like didn't know any JavaScript at all, and now is writing full-blown React applications. He can jump in and see just the little parts. You can write crazy long, ridiculous components and make the problem harder, or you can write these really small, concise components. Very easy to tell where to look for in the code, and then see something that just.
You know, that's good architecture and good management. Like that's what that is. Like one of the things that the company I'm working for was struggling before I came on board was they didn't have a lot of strong technical leadership, and so they were just handing entire projects off to single devs, which is just a horrible idea. But and some of the devs weren't breaking down the projects into smaller components. And so like the question always comes like, well, can we do this? And the answer is like, yeah, of course. You just sit there and like break it down into its smaller components. You can build almost anything, and almost anybody can work on it. But you need that leadership to break down your application into those more digestible components. But my question is if you're working on a major build, let's say we're doing some type of stock trading application for a major bank, and it's a very sophisticated React application. Can you take someone that doesn't know JavaScript and throw them into the middle of a deep project and have the same efficiency? Or I don't
think the size of the application
that seems.
I don't think the size of the application matters.
If you're looking at like components, for example, regardless of how large the application is, one component is just one component, right?
Yeah.
Whether the application is 1 million components or 10 components.
As long as they're super
If
well
you've broken
encapsulated.
everything down to a small manageable component, you just look at it and say, okay, this is what it's doing, and you can start working on it. So the size of the application wouldn't exactly matter.
But is there no difference in, because we've spent so much time today talking about the stylistic differences that can occur in React. Is that not a problem when you guys bring
But when
people
you,
on?
for example, if he starts working on React, for example, on the first day, for him that's the only style, right? Even if there are like 10 different ways of doing that thing, as far as that project is concerned, that's the only style to do it. So it doesn't really matter if there are other ways to do it.
So the pattern stays the same throughout the application, or
It should. I mean,
is each component so encapsulated that it really doesn't matter? I could code mine my way, he could code his way, but as long as the inputs and outputs are the same, they'll work together.
I mean, honestly, if I'm working on a project and if two people are designing components in a very different manner, I wouldn't approve that PR. Yeah.
So it comes down to management, it
Yeah,
comes
I
down to
would say
planning
so,
and management.
yes.
It does sound like a management question.
Yeah.
But that being said, yes, they could coexist. No
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, they could, yeah, why not?
They could.
Definitely, yeah.
Like Angular is so if you're doing Angular right, it is so encapsulated and so modular. Like you should be able to take any Angular object out of one application and throw it into another. And also by that logic, if you have multiple developers working on components, if it's properly architected, then they don't need to know what the other one's doing because the objects are properly abstracted. But Angular is strictly coded, so people tend to code it the same way.
May I ask, how many times have you guys experienced, regret at some, design decision or some decision with regards to the use of a particular tool? Like, you get some ways in on a project and you think, actually we should be using something else for this, and you have to do some rewrites.
All the time. That actually happens to me all the time. Every few months,
Right.
And this is to me just a huge reason why I like working with React, because I'm able to spot that early, and I'm able to do like huge refactoring projects inside a React application without breaking stuff, because everything is broken down into these small pieces. So I can like take one piece, like it's easy to connect lots of nodes. You have one type, right? It's kind of like a pure function. You take a component, give back the other component, right? So as long as you maintain that structure, then it's really, really easy to refactor stuff. So
But do you think perhaps there's more of a need to refactor in React projects?
I can't make a comparison to that in Angular specific. I would be worried if it was hard to do that in Angular. Like if that didn't come up.
I think it's a question of need. Like what I think what you're getting at is
But I
because it's
think
so
I'll
strictly
concede
coded,
that
it
maybe it's
doesn't.
easier in React.
To refactor?
To refactor?
I think so.
I would think so, yes. I mean, because a lot of stuff is just pure components, so it's very easy to refactor because given a set of props, it would always render the same thing. It doesn't matter how you actually do it. So you're working with a lot of the times the pure component should be pretty easy.
Alright, yeah, what's that noise actually? I keep on hearing it. It's not good.
I don't think it's me.
What do you guess?
Not me.
Alright, never mind. Go over there. But anyway. Might be the pigeons.
No, we're good. It's
Oh, pigeons. Oh, pigeons. Anyways, last questions, or just to sort of hook a bit. Short answers, maybe. Or I'd say maybe 2 or 3 sentences, I don't know. But what's the better framework to invest time as well as money in and to get the best return? And which one has the best growth potential?
As a developer?
Yeah. Well, I could
personally
say
say
as an
React.
developer, but
I would say React. That's why I'm doing it.
Well, okay, I will say that.
I don't know how to really compare it, to be honest.
The more popular framework is going to have a higher demand, but it's such a high demand industry as it stands. Anyone that has Angular or React on their resume and they actually know it, like there's so many bad developers. I don't even understand why it's a question. There's so many bad developers out there that if you're a good developer, it doesn't matter which one you have on your resume, you're going to have a job.
Well, okay, let's talk about not bad. You have to already be a developer to be bad. So let's just talk about new developers, right? If you're someone that's coming into the industry, I think sort of the obvious answer here is that React has there are more jobs.
Yeah.
Just so from pragmatic point of view, you're going to get your bang for your buck for React. I would just learn both. I don't know. I think that you can learn React in a weekend, and I don't know how long it takes to learn.
Angular is like Batman Arkham Asylum. The combat system seems simplistic at first, but is difficult to master.
I don't know. I mean, does that include the parts where you're like, like you're Batman, you're swinging around trying to do stealth?
I'm talking specifically the combo system.
Okay.
No, but no, seriously, if anyone's ever played Arkham Asylum or any other combat system, it's really easy to pick up. Like super easy. Like within 20 minutes of looking at Google's documentation on how to start an Angular application, you can start building really cool applications, but it would take forever to master it's such a big thing.
Yeah.
Like even you didn't know that they incorporated like their own custom version of Redux into the system today. And I had I've learned so much about React today, it's not funny. Because things move so damn quick. So.
All right. Sounds like you want
Well, I was just going to say that learning Angular might be a good exercise for somebody getting into front-end web development because it shows you patterns that are tried and true and they're tested. And it's sad perhaps following some pattern with React and then getting a job and finding out that all you learned they're not using any of it and you're doing it a different way. At least Angular gives you a glimpse on what the usual things that you'll come across are and how to attack them.
Well, and it depends. Are you I'm really hoping there's a Sitecore dev in here that wants to move to the front end because that's exactly what I need right now. But it depends. If you have a prior history of programming, then React, I see no benefit to one over the other. But like I said earlier, if you don't have a prior history of programming, the structuredness of Angular I think is healthy. I think it'll teach you stuff.
I've tried to show you the reason why you go to React. I guess I failed.
Nah, it's all good. So, do you have any opinions on this? We didn't hear you.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think if you're talking about getting a job, I personally think that React is the way to go because a lot of companies are moving toward React at this point, and every company is like, okay, we're moving from Angular to React. I know at least 3 companies that have done that. I've worked at one such company. So I would say just learn React. I don't know what the market would look like in a year, but at this point, I would pick React.
It looks like Angular will find its place more in the enterprise community, and startups will continue to use React.
I would kind of agree with that. I've seen that whenever a job posting has Angular, it's like an enterprise level app.
It's usually
it's
much
level
larger.
app, and all the other companies are using React, and a couple of them are using Vue.js, but that's only a couple.
All right.
Yeah, it's React, again, React is stricter and is more predictable, so larger scale corporations are gonna side with it every single time. So it also depends on what type of developer you wanna be, right? If you wanna be a more agile, scrappy developer, React is the way to go. If you wanna be more structured, which is really weird for me to say because I'm a creative technologist that likes doing really cool looking, spectacular things. And so what I do is I use Angular and take a sledgehammer to it to make it do what I want it to do, whereas I'd probably be well better suited to be a React developer. But anyway, I digress.
No worries, gents. We have a ton of questions. Go, right?
So we've gone a bit over time, but I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, if you want to do a Q&A.
Yeah, sure, what's up?
Yeah, that one in the back. I remember seeing that too. Sorry about that.
How easy is it to do test-driven development?
To do what?
Test-driven development.
Test-driven development of
Do you do test a lot on the front end? What
Yeah.
kind of, do you use like,
just an enzyme, mock-up.
yeah, no, but I was saying, what's that, snapshot rendering?
Snapshot.
You do that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. With React, it's pretty easy, at least in my opinion, because you just because you're making components, you write the test first. Okay, this is what the component is supposed to do. Because most of the components in React tend to be pure components, it's very easy to write a test. You say, okay, if I give it these props, it should render like this. So test-driven development in React, I think, is pretty easy. As long as you're writing pure components, which you should.
Pretty much the same in Angular.
Yeah, it comes out of the box.
Just
You already have
built
the
it
testing
as-
thing already done, yeah. But yeah, both.
You have to write them properly. And you have to write the tests.
Developer getting into front end, so I'm not sure exactly how it works.
Yeah, I mean, just again, look at the documentation, but the way to write the test is pretty straightforward, and the systems to run the tests in Angular are built into the CLI. And you mentioned 3 different options for testing within React. There's enzyme.
Oh, it's all the same. It's all kind of part of the same solution.
Alright.
So you're gonna have to put your testing environment together using React. You're gonna have to make a decision at some point of how you're gonna do your tests, right? Whereas Angular will just tell you how to do it.
All right.
Actually, I'm an Angular developer and worked for the last year with Firebase, Angular 4 and Firebase. So I didn't try the React. I just want to ask about the SEO. How React is to handle SEO, especially for dynamic content.
Sure, so I think Angular had kind of Angular was the first framework, or Angular 1 had this problem probably the first.
I will never talk about Angular.
No, it's okay, but it's worth mentioning, right? So like they had that problem because they were the first ones that were sort of like giving you a blank page basically, and then you had to fill it in later, and it was a SEO problem, right? So there were sort of some solutions to read through the sort of Angular code and generate what would be the tags or how to get some HTML stuff. One thing that's really nice about React is that there's just like a render to string function. You just take your React components and say, okay, I want to render it on the server side.
Can the search engine do this?
So if you render it on the server side, then it has exactly all the same SEO capabilities as any server rendered application.
Because for Angular, they have the Angular Universal, and for a few months they released the render tone, which is based on headless Chrome. It's another way to do that, so I'm not sure.
So I think the answer is it's a solved problem in both camps. Like both React and Angular 4 or 5 have their strategies. If SEO is important, then it's definitely there's something we can do for React.
I would argue that Angular will have an ongoing advantage when it comes to SEO just because Google.
Yeah, they stick secret tags in everything.
Well, Google, there's actually a document from Google on how specifically to optimize Angular applications for SEO, and I don't think they provide a document.
But that's because Angular was especially notorious for bad SEO.
If you follow that document, it will be like crazy. Sorry. Because for Angular, you have either Webpack or Angular CLI, so it's different. And especially if your application is too complex and you have a lot of third-party components installed, definitely it will not work.
No, absolutely. As you include a bunch of third-party components on anything, it's going to screw up anything.
You need a data.
Yes, thank you. So we talked a lot about JavaScript, but like we haven't talked at all about CSS. And what's the styling story like on Angular and React?
From Angular perspective, whatever the hell you want to use. Right out of the gate, the CLI supports less Sass and straight up CSS. The way it's written is the scoping of the components that you're doing is done based on the component. So any styling you do is going to be specific to the component that you're building, so it's really well encapsulated. I hate that we still call it CSS because I don't feel like we're cascading anything anymore. Like, are we, like, it's just style sheets now because we're not cascading anything. The whole, again, history lesson, cascading style sheets, you write one style and apply it to everything. Not how it works anymore. But yeah, any way you want to do it in Angular.
What's the standard way? What's that?
Well, every component has a CSS file attached to it, and usually, you know, they'll use some transpiled CSS like Sass, right? But it's basically every component has an HTML, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file, and then it's encapsulated not using the shadow DOM, but just adding, you know, some add-on strings to the class names or whatever, so that it's kind of virtual encapsulation.
Is there a place to put global styles?
Yeah. Well, it's inherited, so.
And then on React?
So in React, the way it works is, I mean, you can pick your own solution. So different people go with different solution. For example, some people prefer CSS in JavaScript. So they would write it in JavaScript and that is compiled to CSS. Some people like me, I prefer CSS separate from my JavaScript. And if you want to use less Sass, whatever you want, you can do that, but there is no one solution. Lately, people have been using styled components a lot. So every component, like I said in React.js, you have everything is a component. So for each component, you can have its own styles using styled components. So the good thing about that is that you can just kind of reuse that component anywhere. You can even put it on NPM, and if you download it and use it in any other app, it will look the same. So, but it's up to you how you want to use CSS. There is no one right answer.
I think the jury's still out.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that. It's not really a settled question in the React world.
Can we coin a new term here? ESS, encapsulated styles?
So like, in terms of like style components, you said you can put it up on NPM and kind of ship it around. So like you talked about the date picker earlier. Is that what you'd recommend, kind of sharing styles and JavaScript as one cohesive package? Is there something like that on Angular as well?
I can't talk about Angular, but if you use a component that's on NPM, it would definitely have its own style sheets. You can override some of the styles. For example, if you have a date picker, it would have, say, if it has like 3 drop-downs, they would have their own styles, but you can override those. But it really depends on how that person designed that component. Sometimes you can even have a component where you cannot override the styles. It just ships with its own styles, and that's it. So it's really how you design it.
With Angular, it depends on how thorough you are on styling your component within the component. So, because with Angular, it will inherit the global styles first, and then look to the specific component to style it. So if you style everything in that component, and then you export that component with all of its pieces, it will look exactly like that in any application you put it in. But all components need to be registered with the application in Angular. So it's all about planning at that point and how you plan your components in the application.
So do you write your CSS in JavaScript or just like your actual CSS?
I just do what the CLI does. So it gives me 3 files, a LS, JS, and an HTML template.
Okay, so it's less. Okay.
I do my less. Well, no, because you choose.
Okay.
Default is vanilla. But if when you go like, and I'm gonna get the syntax wrong, like ng app space dash dash sass, then it's sass, or space dash dash less, then it's less.
Okay.
And if it's nothing, it's nothing. So when you create your app, you decide what pre-compiler you're gonna use, and then it's just done. And you don't need to think about it.
With Angular, can you mix less and Sass in the same app?
God, I hope not.
Why would you want to do that?
Jesus, no, I hope not.
Because
No.
you mentioned that you could select.
Well, you define it, but like I'm sure you could hack that together, but like with a separate gulp file.
That's so
Why?
evil.
Yeah, I want the component object to write it whatever they want.
Okay, whatever pre-compiler they want.
I trust that developer, you do that.
I not default through Angular, but I could hack a solution for you, but you would never want to do that.
Just ask, I was curious.
Okay.
All right, well.
I don't want to do it.
Okay. No worries.